My best friend of 12 years destroyed my career in 30 seconds, and I didn't even know it was happening until it was too late. What she did was so calculated, so perfectly timed, that I'm still impressed by her cruelty even now, 3 years later. Let me paint you a picture of Sarah Martinez. We met during our freshman year at Northwestern, bonded over late-night study sessions and shared dreams of conquering the Chicago tech scene. She was the type of friend who remembered your birthday, brought you soup when you were sick, and stayed up all night helping you prepare for job interviews. For over a decade, I trusted her with everything. My insecurities, my relationships, my career aspirations. She was the maid of honor at my wedding, the first person I called when I got promoted, the one who celebrated every milestone with genuine excitement. Or so I thought. The truth is, Sarah had been playing a much longer game than I ever imagined. While I was busy being grateful for her friendship, she was quietly cataloging every piece of information I shared, every vulnerability I revealed, every success I achieved. She was building an arsenal, and I was handing her the ammunition. The setup began innocently enough. In early 2021, both Sarah and I were working at different companies but in the same industry, user experience design. I was a senior designer at a mid-size fintech startup called Velocity, while she was stuck in a junior position at a larger corporation, constantly complaining about how her talents were being wasted. Looking back, I should have noticed how her complaints always seemed to intensify right after I shared good news about my own career. When I mentioned that Velocity was expanding and looking for another senior designer, Sarah's eyes lit up with what I mistook for excitement. She begged me to put in a good word for her, reminded me of all the times she'd helped me through difficult projects in college, and painted a picture of how amazing it would be to work together again. The nostalgia was intoxicating. I could already imagine us grabbing lunch together, collaborating on projects, recreating that easy partnership we'd had in school. I should have known better. I should have remembered that Sarah had always been competitive even back in college. She was the type who would smile and congratulate you on a good grade, then immediately ask what your exact score was so she could compare it to her own. She was the one who would volunteer to help you with a project, then somehow make it all about her contributions. But those red flags were buried under years of friendship, countless shared memories, and my own naive belief that people don't change. The interview process was a formality. Sarah was talented, no doubt about it, and I gave her the strongest recommendation I could. I told my manager, David, that she was brilliant, reliable, and exactly the kind of creative thinker our team needed. I vouched for her character, her work ethic, and her ability to collaborate effectively. I even mentioned how we'd worked together successfully in the past, conveniently forgetting that most of those collaborations had ended with some form of drama or tension. Sarah joined Velocity in March 2021, and the first few months were exactly what I'd hoped for. We fell back into our old rhythm, bouncing ideas off each other, sharing inside jokes during meetings, and occasionally grabbing drinks after work. She seemed genuinely grateful for the opportunity, and repeatedly thanked me for helping her get the position. I felt good about myself, like I'd done something meaningful by helping a friend level up in her career. But subtle changes began almost immediately. Sarah started arriving earlier than me, staying later, and volunteering for high-visibility projects. She would casually mention in team meetings how she'd been thinking about certain design challenges over the weekend, or how she'd noticed potential improvements to ongoing projects. Nothing overt, nothing that couldn't be explained by genuine enthusiasm for her new role. The first real warning sign came during a client presentation in June. We were pitching a redesign for a major banking app, a project I'd been leading for 3 months. Sarah and I had collaborated on several aspects of the design, and she'd contributed some genuinely good ideas. But during the presentation, she began subtly repositioning herself as the primary designer. When the client asked questions about specific design decisions, Sarah would jump in with detailed explanations before I could respond. She used phrases like, "When I was developing this concept, and my approach to this challenge was." I noticed it, but I didn't say anything. We were friends, after all, and I didn't want to create tension over what might have been innocent enthusiasm. I told myself that she was just trying to make a good impression in her new role, that she'd settle into more appropriate boundaries once she felt secure in the position. The client loved the presentation and specifically complimented Sarah's insights. David pulled me aside afterward and mentioned how impressed he was with Sarah's contributions, how she seemed to really understand the client's needs. I smiled and agreed, pushing down the uncomfortable feeling in my stomach. Over the next few months, this pattern repeated and intensified. Sarah would volunteer for projects I was supposed to lead, suggest improvements to my work in front of the team, and gradually position herself as the go-to person for complex design challenges. She had a gift for making her interventions seem helpful rather than competitive. She would couch her suggestions in supportive language, saying things like building on what you've started, or maybe we could take this even further. The most insidious part was how she used our friendship as a shield. Whenever I felt uncomfortable with her behavior, she would remind me of our history, joke about how we were partners in crime again, or make plans for us to hang out outside of work. She kept me emotionally invested in maintaining our relationship, even as she was systematically undermining my professional standing. By October, the dynamic had shifted completely. Sarah was getting invited to strategy meetings I wasn't included in, clients were requesting her specifically for new projects, and David was regularly praising her innovative thinking. Meanwhile, I found myself increasingly sidelined, relegated to executing designs rather than creating them, and watching projects I'd initiated get reassigned to Sarah's leadership. The breaking point came during our annual performance review cycle. I'd been expecting a strong evaluation, possibly even a promotion to lead designer. I'd been with the company for 2 years, had successfully managed multiple high-profile projects, and had brought in Sarah, who was clearly performing well. I felt confident about my contributions and my future with the company. David's demeanor during our review meeting should have prepared me for what was coming. He seemed uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact and shuffling through papers more than usual. When he finally looked up, his expression was serious. "We need to talk about some concerns that have been raised about your performance," he said. The words hit me like a physical blow. Concerns? What concerns? I'd been getting positive feedback on my work, clients seemed satisfied, and I'd been meeting all my deadlines. I asked for specifics, trying to keep my voice steady. David explained that several team members had come forward with observations about my work quality and professional behavior. According to their reports, I'd been taking credit for collaborative work, missing important details in my designs, and showing resistance to feedback from colleagues. Most damaging of all, there were concerns about my ability to work effectively with clients, with specific examples of situations where I'd apparently been unprofessional or dismissive. I sat there in stunned silence as David outlined these allegations. Every example he gave was a twisted version of real events, situations where Sarah had been present and involved. The collaborative work I was accused of stealing credit for included projects where Sarah had made significant contributions after I'd already established the core concepts. The client interactions that were being characterized as unprofessional were moments where I pushed back against unreasonable requests or defended our design decisions. But the most devastating part was that David had documentation. Email threads, meeting notes, even a recorded client call where my tone was supposedly inappropriate. Someone had been meticulously building a case against me, and that someone had access to detailed information about my projects, my client relationships, and my work processes. The realization hit me like a cold wave. Only one person had that level of access to my work and my professional interactions. Only one person had been present for most of these situations and could provide the kind of detailed accounts that David was referencing. Sarah had been documenting everything, but not to protect me or to support our collaboration. She'd been building a case against me, methodically collecting evidence of every mistake, every moment of frustration, every instance where I'd been less than perfect. And she'd been sharing this information with other team members, framing it as concern for the team's performance and the company's reputation. David continued with the review, explaining that while they valued my technical skills, these behavioral concerns were serious enough to warrant a formal improvement plan. I would be working under closer supervision, my client interactions would be limited, and I would need to demonstrate significant improvement over the next 90 days to avoid further disciplinary action. I left that meeting feeling completely shattered. In the span of 30 minutes, my professional reputation had been destroyed, my career trajectory had been derailed, and my confidence had been obliterated. The worst part was that I couldn't even defend myself effectively, because the person who'd orchestrated this campaign was supposed to be my closest friend. The next few days were a blur of confusion and denial. I kept trying to convince myself that there had been some misunderstanding, that Sarah couldn't possibly have been involved in what had happened. But the evidence was overwhelming. She was the only person who could have provided the level of detail included in the complaints against me. She was the only one who'd been present for all the situations that were being used as evidence of my poor performance. I decided to confront her directly, hoping against hope that there was some explanation that would preserve our friendship and my faith in human nature. I asked her to grab coffee after work, the same ritual we'd been performing for months. Sarah seemed genuinely concerned about my obvious distress, asking if everything was okay and offering to listen if I needed to talk. The conversation that followed was a masterclass in manipulation. When I carefully explained what had happened in my review meeting, Sarah's reaction was perfect. Shocked, sympathetic, and appropriately outraged on my behalf. She couldn't believe that people would say such things about me, especially after all the great work I'd been doing. She speculated that maybe some team members were jealous of my success, or threatened by my relationship with clients. But as she spoke, I noticed small inconsistencies in her responses. She seemed to know too much about the specific complaints, asked questions that suggested she was already familiar with the details, and offered explanations that felt rehearsed rather than spontaneous. When I mentioned the documented evidence, she quickly suggested that maybe someone had been misinterpreting my actions or taking things out of context. The final confirmation came when she volunteered to help me figure out who might have been spreading these stories about me. She was so eager to investigate, so ready to support me in identifying the real culprit, that her guilt became obvious. She was overcompensating, trying too hard to appear innocent and helpful. I went home that night knowing that my best friend had destroyed my career, but I still couldn't understand why. We'd been friends for 12 years. I'd helped her get this job. I'd celebrated her successes and supported her through challenges. What could possibly motivate someone to betray a friendship so completely? The answer came gradually, through conversations with other colleagues and careful observation of Sarah's behavior in the following weeks. The truth was both simpler and more complex than I'd expected. Sarah had always been jealous of my success, but she'd hidden it well behind supportive words and celebratory gestures. When I'd helped her get the job at Velocity, she'd seen it as confirmation of her own inadequacy. The successful friend throwing a bone to the struggling one. Instead of feeling grateful, she'd felt humiliated. More importantly, she'd recognized an opportunity. By joining my team, she could position herself to take over my role, my projects, and my relationships. She'd spent months studying my work, learning my processes, and identifying my weaknesses. She'd cultivated relationships with team members, positioning herself as the reliable alternative to my supposedly difficult personality. The complaints against me weren't entirely fabricated. Sarah had taken real moments of frustration, normal workplace tensions, and legitimate professional disagreements, then reframed them as evidence of deeper character flaws. She'd been patient, strategic, and incredibly thorough in building her case. What made it so effective was that Sarah understood exactly how to present these concerns in a way that would resonate with management. She didn't go to David directly with complaints about me. That would have seemed vindictive and obvious. Instead, she'd shared her observations with other team members, expressed concern about project outcomes, and gradually built a consensus that something needed to be done about my behavior. By the time David heard about these issues, they were coming from multiple sources and seemed to represent a genuine team concern rather than personal animosity. Sarah had orchestrated the whole thing while maintaining plausible deniability and positioning herself as a reluctant whistleblower who was only speaking up for the good of the team. The 90-day improvement plan was a joke. How do you improve your performance when the people evaluating you have already decided you're a problem? How do you rebuild relationships when your colleagues have been told that you're difficult to work with? How do you regain trust when every interaction is being scrutinized for signs of the behavior you're accused of? Sarah, meanwhile, was thriving. She'd been promoted to lead designer within 6 months of my review, taking over the exact role I'd been expecting to grow into. She was praised for her collaborative approach, her innovative thinking, and her ability to work effectively with both clients and colleagues. Everything I'd been accused of lacking, she seemed to possess in abundance. The most painful part was watching her perform sympathy for my situation. She would ask how I was doing, offer to help with my projects, and express confusion about why my career had stalled. She played the role of the concerned friend perfectly, never letting on that she was the architect of my professional destruction. I lasted 8 months under the improvement plan before I finally resigned. The constant scrutiny, the damaged relationships, and the complete loss of trust in my own judgment had made it impossible to function effectively. I'd become exactly the kind of employee I was accused of being: defensive, isolated, and increasingly bitter about my treatment. Sarah organized a farewell happy hour for me, complete with a heartfelt speech about our friendship and her gratitude for everything I'd taught her. She gave me a gift, a framed photo of us from college with an inscription about how proud she was of my courage in pursuing new opportunities. The performance was flawless, and I almost believed it myself. It took me 6 months to find another job, and even then I had to take a step backward in terms of seniority and salary. The gap in my employment history was difficult to explain, and I could sense potential employers' concern about why I'd left my previous position. Sarah had offered to serve as a reference, but I knew better than to trust her with that responsibility. The new job was fine, but it wasn't the same. I'd lost confidence in my abilities, my judgment, and my ability to read people. I found myself constantly second-guessing my interactions with colleagues, wondering if I was being too assertive, too collaborative, or too defensive. The easy professional relationships I'd once taken for granted became sources of anxiety and self-doubt. Sarah and I maintained sporadic contact for about a year after I left Velocity. She would text occasionally, suggesting we grab coffee or catch up over drinks. I would make excuses, claiming to be too busy or dealing with family obligations. Eventually, she stopped reaching out, and our friendship faded into nothing more than occasional social media interactions. The final piece of the puzzle came 2 years later, when I ran into Marcus, a former colleague from Velocity, at an industry conference. We'd worked together on several projects, and he'd always been friendly and professional. Over drinks, he mentioned how surprised he'd been by my departure, and how different the team dynamic had become after I left. When I asked what he meant, Marcus explained that several people had eventually realized what had actually happened. Sarah's version of events had started to fall apart as team members compared notes and remembered situations differently than she described them. More importantly, her behavior after my departure had revealed her true character. Without me as a target, Sarah had turned her attention to other colleagues, using the same tactics of subtle undermining and strategic alliance building. She tried to position herself as the solution to problems she'd created. But this time, people were more aware of what was happening. Her reputation for collaboration and team building had gradually eroded as her pattern of behavior became more obvious. Marcus told me that several team members had approached David to express regret about their role in my departure. They'd realized that Sarah had manipulated their perceptions, using their trust and professional concerns to serve her own agenda. The consensus was that they'd been played, and that I'd been treated unfairly. But by then it was too late. I'd already moved on, rebuilt my career elsewhere, and learned to function without the toxic dynamic that had defined my final months at Velocity. The vindication felt hollow, like being declared innocent after you've already served your sentence. The experience taught me lessons I never wanted to learn about friendship, trust, and the capacity for betrayal that exists in people you think you know. Sarah wasn't a sociopath or a cartoon villain. She was a normal person who'd allowed jealousy and ambition to override her moral compass. She'd rationalized her behavior by convincing herself that she was more deserving of success than I was, that I'd somehow had unfair advantages, and that she was simply leveling the playing field. The most disturbing part was how easily she'd been able to manipulate not just me, but an entire team of intelligent, well-meaning professionals. She'd exploited their trust, their desire to be fair, and their commitment to team harmony. She'd turned their best instincts against them, using their willingness to address problems as a weapon against someone who'd considered them friends. Looking back, I can see the warning signs I missed, the moments when I should have recognized what was happening. But I also understand why I didn't. When someone has been your friend for over a decade, when they've been present for major life events and supported you through difficult times, it's almost impossible to believe they're capable of such calculated betrayal. The relationship between friendship and professional life is more complex than most people realize. We want to believe that personal loyalty translates into professional integrity, that someone who cares about you as a person would never deliberately harm your career. But the truth is that professional success can bring out the worst in people, even people you trust completely. Sarah's betrayal wasn't a moment of weakness or a single bad decision. It was a sustained campaign that required planning, patience, and a complete disregard for the damage it would cause to someone who'd considered her a sister. She'd weaponized our friendship, using the intimacy and trust we'd built over years to gather the information she needed to destroy my professional reputation. The aftermath extended far beyond my career. I found myself questioning other relationships, wondering if friends were genuinely supportive or secretly resentful. I became more guarded in professional settings, less willing to mentor colleagues or share credit for collaborative work. The natural openness and trust that had served me well in my career became sources of vulnerability and anxiety. Recovery was a slow process that required rebuilding not just my professional reputation, but my faith in my own judgment. I had to learn to trust my instincts again, to believe that not everyone was secretly plotting against me, and to find the balance between healthy caution and paralyzing suspicion. The irony is that Sarah's betrayal ultimately made me stronger and more successful than I'd been before. The experience forced me to develop better boundaries, clearer communication skills, and a more strategic approach to professional relationships. I learned to document my work more thoroughly, to build broader networks of support, and to recognize warning signs of toxic behavior. 3 years later, I'm in a better position than I was at Velocity, working for a company that values transparency and authentic collaboration. I've been promoted twice, built strong relationships with clients and colleagues, and regained confidence in my abilities. Sarah's attempt to destroy my career ultimately pushed me toward opportunities one might never have pursued otherwise. I don't know what happened to Sarah's career after the truth about her behavior became more widely known. I don't follow her on social media, and I've avoided asking mutual acquaintances about her progress. There's a part of me that's curious about whether she faced consequences for her actions, but I've learned that seeking that kind of closure is less important than focusing on my own growth and success. The experience taught me that betrayal is often most devastating when it comes from people we trust completely. Sarah's actions weren't just professional sabotage. They were a violation of 12 years of friendship, a betrayal of every confidence I'd shared, and a complete disregard for the person I'd believed her to be. But I've also learned that surviving that kind of betrayal can be transformative. It strips away illusions about human nature, forces you to develop stronger boundaries, and ultimately teaches you to value authentic relationships over convenient ones. The friends I've made since then are people who've proven their loyalty through actions, not just words, and who understand that true friendship requires mutual respect and genuine support. The professional world is full of people like Sarah, individuals who smile to your face while systematically undermining your success. They're skilled at exploiting trust, manipulating perceptions, and positioning themselves as solutions to problems they've created. The key to protecting yourself isn't to become cynical or suspicious of everyone, but to learn to recognize the patterns and trust your instincts when something feels wrong. If you're dealing with a situation like mine, remember that documentation is crucial, trusted allies are invaluable, and sometimes the best response to betrayal is simply to remove yourself from the toxic environment and rebuild elsewhere. Don't waste energy trying to expose or punish the person who's betrayed you. Focus on protecting yourself and creating better opportunities. The most important lesson I learned is that not everyone who claims to support your success actually wants to see you succeed. Some people are genuinely happy for your achievements, while others are secretly keeping score and waiting for an opportunity to even the balance. The difference isn't always obvious, but it becomes clear when the stakes are high enough. Sarah taught me that friendship and professional integrity don't always align, that people can compartmentalize their behavior in ways that allow them to maintain personal relationships while destroying professional ones. She was able to smile at me, share meals with me, and express concern for my well-being, while simultaneously orchestrating the destruction of my career. That level of calculated deception is difficult to process, but it's also liberating to understand. Once you accept that some people are capable of that kind of betrayal, you can protect yourself more effectively without becoming paranoid or cynical about everyone you meet. The story doesn't end with dramatic confrontation or satisfying revenge. Real life is messier than that. Sarah got away with her betrayal in the short term, achieved the professional success she'd been seeking, and probably convinced herself that she'd done what was necessary to advance her career. I left quietly, rebuilt elsewhere, and learned to function without the need for closure or vindication. But the truth has a way of emerging over time, and patterns of behavior are difficult to hide indefinitely. Sarah's success at Velocity was built on a foundation of manipulation and betrayal, and those same tactics eventually turned her colleagues against her. The reputation she'd worked so hard to build was ultimately undermined by her own actions. Meanwhile, I've built a career based on authentic relationships, genuine collaboration, and earned trust. It took longer than I'd hoped, required more resilience than I'd expected, and forced me to develop skills I'd never needed before. But it's been worth it. The experience changed how I approach both friendship and professional relationships. I'm more careful about sharing confidential information, more aware of competitive dynamics, and more strategic about building alliances. I've learned to separate personal affection from professional trust, and to recognize that even good people can make terrible decisions when they feel threatened or desperate. Most importantly, I've learned that survival isn't about avoiding betrayal. It's about developing the resilience to recover from it. Sarah's betrayal was devastating, but it wasn't permanent. Careers can be rebuilt, reputations can be restored, and trust can be earned again. The key is to learn from the experience without allowing it to define you. If you've made it this far, you probably recognize something familiar in this story. Maybe you've experienced a similar betrayal, or maybe you're dealing with someone who reminds you of Sarah. Either way, I hope my experience provides some insight into the complex dynamics of friendship, jealousy, and professional ambition. The most important thing to remember is that other people's actions reflect their character, not yours. Sarah's betrayal wasn't a reflection of my worth or my friendship. It was a reflection of her own insecurities, ambitions, and moral boundaries. Understanding that distinction is crucial for moving forward, without carrying the weight of someone else's choices. Recovery from this kind of betrayal is possible, but it requires patience, self-compassion, and a willingness to rebuild from the ground up. It's not easy and it's not quick, but it's absolutely achievable if you're willing to do the work. The professional world will always contain people who prioritize their own success over genuine relationships. The key is learning to identify them early, protect yourself appropriately, and build a network of allies who share your values. Most people are decent, honest, and genuinely supportive, but the ones who aren't can cause tremendous damage if you're not prepared for their behavior. Sarah's story is ultimately a cautionary tale about the danger of unchecked ambition and the importance of maintaining ethical boundaries, even in competitive environments. She achieved short-term success through manipulation and betrayal, but she also destroyed relationships, damaged her reputation, and probably created long-term consequences she didn't anticipate. My story is hopefully an example of how it's possible to survive that kind of betrayal and emerge stronger on the other side. It's not the story I would have chosen to live, but it's the story that taught me the most about resilience, authenticity, and the true value of genuine relationships. The experience also taught me about the importance of speaking up when you witness injustice, even when it's uncomfortable or risky. Several of my former colleagues eventually realized what had happened and expressed regret about their role in my departure. Their willingness to acknowledge their mistakes was meaningful, even though it came too late to change the outcome. If you're in a position where you're witnessing someone being unfairly treated, or if you suspect that someone is being manipulated or deceived, consider speaking up. It might not be possible to change the immediate situation, but it could make a difference in the long run, and it might provide valuable support to someone who needs it. The relationship between personal and professional ethics is something that everyone needs to navigate carefully. We all want to succeed in our careers, and we all face situations where advancing our own interests might conflict with treating others fairly. The key is maintaining clear boundaries about what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do, regardless of the potential benefits. Sarah crossed those boundaries, and while she achieved short-term success, she also damaged relationships and compromised her own integrity. The question each of us has to answer is whether professional advancement is worth the cost of treating others dishonestly or unfairly. Looking back, I can see that the signs of Sarah's jealousy and competitive nature were there from the beginning of our friendship, but I'd chosen to focus on the positive aspects of our relationship, the shared experiences and mutual support that made our friendship valuable. I'd ignored or rationalized away the moments when her competitive nature showed through, telling myself that everyone has flaws and that loyalty to old friends means accepting their imperfections. The lesson isn't that I should have been more suspicious or less trusting. It's that I should have paid attention to patterns of behavior and trusted my instincts when something felt wrong. There's a difference between accepting someone's flaws and ignoring warning signs about their character. Healthy relationships, both personal and professional, require mutual respect, genuine support, and aligned values. When those elements are missing, the relationship becomes transactional at best and toxic at worst. Sarah's friendship had become transactional long before I realized it, and I'd been providing much more value than I was receiving in return. The recovery process involved not just rebuilding my career, but also learning to value myself appropriately and to insist on reciprocity in relationships. I had to learn to recognize when I was giving more than I was receiving, and to adjust my investment accordingly. This doesn't mean becoming cold or calculating about relationships, but it does mean being honest about whether the people in your life are genuinely supportive or just convenient. True friends celebrate your successes without reservation, support you through challenges without keeping score, and treat you with respect even when no one else is watching. Sarah failed all of those tests, but I'd been so invested in maintaining our friendship that I'd overlooked the failures. The betrayal was painful, but it was also clarifying. It forced me to evaluate all of my relationships more honestly, and to invest my time and energy in people who truly deserved it. The professional implications of the experience extended far beyond my departure from Velocity. I had to learn new skills for managing workplace relationships, documenting my contributions, and protecting myself from similar situations. I had to become more strategic about building alliances and more careful about sharing information. These changes made me more effective in my career, but they also made me more guarded and less spontaneous in professional settings. There's a cost to that kind of self-protection, and it's taken time to find the right balance between healthy caution and authentic engagement. The experience also highlighted the importance of having mentors and advocates outside of your immediate work environment. If I'd had stronger relationships with people in other departments or other companies, I might have had more options when the situation at Velocity became untenable. Building a diverse professional network isn't just about finding new opportunities. It's about having sources of support and perspective that can help you navigate difficult situations. Sarah was able to isolate me within my own team, but she couldn't have controlled my relationships with people outside of Velocity. The story of Sarah's betrayal is ultimately a story about the complexity of human relationships and the ways that personal and professional interests can conflict. It's about the importance of maintaining ethical boundaries, the value of authentic relationships, and the possibility of recovery from even devastating betrayals. If you're dealing with a similar situation, remember that you're not alone, that recovery is possible, and that the experience can ultimately make you stronger and more successful. Focus on protecting yourself, building genuine relationships, and maintaining your own integrity regardless of how others behave. The most important thing is to learn from the experience without allowing it to define you or to make you cynical about human nature. Most people are decent and honest, and most professional relationships are built on mutual respect and shared goals. The people like Sarah are the exception, not the rule, but they're dangerous enough that it's worth learning to recognize and protect yourself from their behavior. 3 years later, I'm grateful for the lessons I learned, even though I wouldn't choose to repeat the experience. Sarah's betrayal taught me about resilience, authenticity, and the true value of genuine relationships. It forced me to develop skills I never knew I needed, and to build a career based on earned trust, rather than assumed loyalty. The experience also taught me about the importance of sharing these stories, of helping others recognize and prepare for similar situations. Betrayal thrives in isolation and silence, but it loses its power when people understand the patterns and know how to protect themselves. So if you recognize yourself in this story, either as someone who's been betrayed or as someone who's witnessed similar behavior, I encourage you to speak up, to support authentic relationships, and to maintain your own ethical boundaries regardless of the cost. The professional world needs more people who prioritize integrity over advancement, and who understand that true success is built on genuine relationships, rather than manipulation and betrayal. The story doesn't end with revenge or dramatic justice, but it does end with recovery, growth, and the hard-won wisdom that comes from surviving betrayal. That's not the ending I would have chosen, But it's the ending that taught me the most about resilience, authenticity, and the true value of genuine relationships. Take a moment to reflect on your own experiences with friendship and professional relationships. Have you encountered someone like Sarah? How did you handle the situation? What lessons did you learn? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about navigating the complex world of work and relationships.